Systems. This is Mrs. Skeen. Today we are going to cover greatest common factor and least common multiple. If we look at our learning target, it says I can find the greatest common factor of two numbers less than or equal to 100. So before we get into actually finding the greatest common factor and the least common multiple, let's take a look at these two definitions first. They'll help us as we go along. So the first one says greatest common factor, or GCF. When we look at that GCF right there, it's something we need to be familiar with because sometimes they won't ask for the greatest common factor. They will just say find the GCF. So if we look at that definition there in blue, it says the largest number that divides into two or more numbers. So greatest right here and largest obviously go together. They mean the same thing. Common, right? We're looking at two different numbers and finding the factor that's in common between the two. And when we look at the word factor, okay, a factor is a number that can, two numbers that can be multiplied together to give us a number. So if we think of 6, the factors of 6 are 1 and 6 and 2 and 3. Each of those pairs of numbers can be multiplied together to get that number. Now, because multiplication and division, right, are opposites or inverse operations, we're going to be looking for numbers that can, it says right here, divide into two or more numbers. Least common multiple, on the other hand, or as it will be referred to, LCM, is the smallest multiple that two or more numbers share in common. So again, least and smallest. So we're looking for a little number, right? A small number. And when we look at the word multiple, a multiple is also referred to like when we were in younger grades and we learned about skip counting or count bys. So if we think of 3, 3, 6, 9, 12, or 5, and 5, 10, 15, those are those skip counting is what multiples are. So we're going to be looking for the smallest multiple that are two or more numbers. Most of the time we'll just be dealing with two numbers that they share in common. So with the ladder method, you have our two numbers that we are working with. We are working with 54 and 72, trying to find the greatest common factor of those two numbers, and then we'll find the least common multiple. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to find a number that can go into 54 and into 72. So if we know our math facts, this is a little bit easier. So if we're thinking of 54, and we're trying to think of what numbers can I multiply together to get 54. So when I'm thinking about this, I know that 6 times 9 is 54. And when I look at that, 6 and 9 also work for 72. So I just need to choose one. I'm going to choose 6. So that number goes out front. And then I take 54. And I'm factoring out that 6. So I'm dividing out that 6. 54 divided by 6 is 9. And 72 divided by 6 is 12. Now I'm looking at the 9 and the 12. And I have to ask myself, is there a number that goes into 9 and into 12? And yes, there is. So I'm going to make my ladder. And I know that to pull a factor out front, 3 goes into 9 and 3 goes into 12. 9 divided by 3 is 3. 12 divided by 3 is 4. Now I'm looking at this 3 and 4. Are there any common factors of 3 and 4? And the only thing I can think of is 1. And 1's not going to help me because when I divide something by 1, I get the same number again. So because there's no other common factors right here, I'm done with the process. Now I'm going to find the greatest common factor. So in order to find the greatest common factor, I take the numbers out front. So I'm going to use this 6 and this 3 out front. And I am going to multiply them to find the greatest common factor. Because they are both factors, I need to multiply them to get the greatest common factor. So 6 times 3 is 18. So the greatest common factor of 54 and 72 is 18. Now, the nice thing about this, in order to find the least common multiple, I don't have to do anything to this process. I just get to use it now. So, least common multiple begins with an L. So, I am going to draw an L outside my numbers right there. So, I take the numbers out front and I take the numbers underneath because they make an L. And then I multiply them. So, I have already multiplied 6 times 3, and I know that's 18. Now I need to multiply it by our 3 right here. So 18 times 3. 8 times 3 is 24. 3 times 1 is 3, plus 2 is 5. Now I multiply that by my last number, which is 4. 54 times 4. 4 times 4 is 16. Carry the 1. 5 times 4 is 20, plus that 1 is 21. So the least common multiple is 260. So this one, go ahead and do right along with me. So our two numbers are 56 and 32. So we're going to write those and draw our first step of our ladder. So again, multiplication tables come in handy. So I'm going to start with 32, and I'm going to think, what can I multiply together to get 32? Now, one thing that helps, if I look at 56 and I look at 32, I know they are both even. So if I can't think of any other factors, I know 2 is a factor, and I could use that. But if I can think of something bigger, it helps kind of limits or lessens how many levels I'm going to have to do on my ladder. So let's start with 32. I know 4 times 8 is 32, and I know 8 goes into 56. So let's use 8. 56 divided by 8 is 7. 32 divided by 8 is 4. I'm looking at that 7 and 4 for a common factor. And there's nothing I can divide both of those by except for 1. So that tells me that my process is done. So this will happen sometimes. If you look out front, we only have one number out front. If you remember our problem before, we had 2 numbers and we had to multiply them. But because we only have one number, that simply becomes our greatest common factor. So the greatest common factor of 56 and 32 is 8. Okay, let's have you pause the video and try this one. After you have tried it, press play and go through the problem with me and check your work. Okay, let's go through this. So we have 36 and 48. Okay, we're thinking of a number that goes into 36 and 48. The first thing that comes to my mind is 6, but you might have thought of something different. You might have thought of 12. You might have thought of 4. You might have used 2. It is not going to matter. We are still going to get the same number in the end. So 36 divided by 6 is 6. 48 divided by 6 is 8. I'm going to draw a ladder because I know there are numbers that go into 6 and into 8, which is 2. 6 divided by 2 is 3. 8 divided by 2 is 4. Anything go into 3 and 4? Nope, the only factor is 1, so we're done. So again, to find my greatest common factor, I take what's out front and I multiply them. 6 times 2 gets me a greatest common factor of 12. Okay, go ahead and pause your video, try this one, and then press play when you have tried it. All right, let's complete this one. 77 and 22. Draw a ladder. Ooh, I know when I have double numbers that 11 can go into them. So I'm going to pull 11 out front. 77 divided by 11 is 7. 22 divided by 11 is 2. Looking at this 7 and 2, nothing goes into them other than 1. So I'm done. I look what's out front and I have an 11. So my greatest common factor is 11. And the more you do this, you'll start to kind of see, right? Some of you maybe were able to see that 11 was going to be the greatest common factor from the very beginning. But it's always good to double check our thinking. Okay, complete this next problem. And then pause your video, press play when you are ready to go over it. Okay, we have 28 and 56. And trying to think of a common factor that I can divide both of them by. And I'm going to use 7. I'm going to pull a 7 out front. So 28 divided by 7 is 4. 56 divided by 7 is 8. I'm going to make another letter because I definitely know there's a common factor between 4 and 8. I know that 4 can go into both of them. You may have used 2, and that's okay. You'll just have to do one more ladder. But 4 divided by 4 is 1. 8 divided by 4 is 2. I look at that 1 and that 2. And the only common factor is 1. So I'm done with my work. Now, again, we take what's out front. And we multiply. 7 times 4 is 28. So our greatest common factor is 28. You'll notice 28 is actually one of my numbers, and that's okay because 28 goes into 28, right? It's a factor of it, and 28 is a factor of 56, so it's our greatest common factor. Okay, again, try this one while you pause your video, and then press play when you are ready to go over it. Okay, we have 72 and 42. So I'm going to start looking at the 42 and trying to think of some things multiplied together. I know 2 would work, but can I think of something bigger? Oh, I know 6 times 7 is 42. So I'm going to choose this because I know 6 times 12 is 72. So 72 divided by 6 must be 12. 42 divided by 6 is 7. Looking at 12 and 7, well, the only factors of 7 are 1 times 7, and those aren't going to help me with a 12. So on this one, again, the only thing out front is a 6. So the greatest common factor is 6. Okay, now we're going to practice some LCM. So let's do one together just to kind of refresh your memory on it, and then we'll give you some to try. So our two numbers are 15 and 10. Our ladder, a common factor between 15 and 10. What can I divide both of them by? I put that up front, which is going to be a 5. 15 divided by 5 is 3. 10 divided by 5 is 2. Looking at 3 and 2, no common factors other than 1. Now, here's where it changes. Least common multiple, right? We look for that L. I always just draw it, then it helps me remember. And inside the L, what do? I multiply those numbers. So 5 times 3 is 15. 15 times 2. 5 times 2 is 10. 2 times 1 is 2, plus 1 is 3. So my least common multiple is 30. Okay, pause your video and complete our next problem. Press play when you're ready to go over it. Okay, we have 22 and 88. Now, common factor. They're both even, so I could use 2, but I also know my 11 times tables, so I'm going to use 11. 22 divided by 11 is 2. 88 divided by 11 is 8. Ooh, there's a common factor in 2 and 8, so I'm going to draw another letter. What goes into both of those? 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 8 divided by 2 is 4. Nothing else in common. So I get my L. And I multiply them. 11 times 2 is 22. Times 1, still 22. Times 4. You may want to write that. 22 times 4. 4 times 2 is 8. 4 times 2 is 8. Interesting. That's one of my numbers. But the least common multiple, right? If I count by 22s, I get 22, 44, 66, 88. And if I count by 88, I get my first number is 88. So the smallest or the least multiple that they have in common is actually 88. Okay, try this one. After you've tried it, go ahead and press play and check your work. 24 and 10. Draw our ladder. I think of 10, I have 2 times 5, so I'm going to pull a 2 out front. 24 divided by 2, 12. 10 divided by 2, 5. 12 and 5. There are no common factors other than 1. So, least common multiple, right? Least common multiple. So I make my L and I multiply. 2 times 12 is 24. 24 times by our last number, which is 5. 5 times 4 is 20. 5 times 2 is 10. Plus 2 is 12. So my least common multiple is 120. Okay, try this problem. Okay, we have 6 and 14. Draw my ladder. A common factor of 6 and 14. I'm going to pull out a 2. 6 divided by 2 is 3. 14 divided by 2 is 7. 3 and 7. No common factors other than 1. So I make my L. And I multiply. 2 times 3 is 6. 6 times 7, hopefully with our multiplication facts, 6 times 7 is 42. So my least common multiple is 42. Okay, last one. Go ahead and pause it and try it. And then check your work. All right, 8 and 12. A common factor. You could use 2, but, right, remember if I do a higher number, it saves me on how many steps I do in my ladder. So I'm going to do 4. 8 divided by 4 is 2. 12 divided by 4 is 3. I look at my 2 and my 3. No other common factors other than 1. So again, I have my least common multiple. So I make my L and I multiply. 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 3 is 24. So my least common multiple is 24.